at least at the time, 5 years ago, nobody was really talking about settling other planets except in the realm of science fiction. It was all sort of this vague, it'll happen sometime in the future thing. And one of the ideas of Mars One is, no, if you make some assumptions, like the big one being we're not coming back, you can do this now. We have the technology to do this now. We have the technology to get to Mars. We've done it any number of times with rovers. We have the technology to keep people alive in a hostile environment. We have the International Space Station. So let's not just talk about this in a theoretical sense. Let's do this. And that's one of the things with Mars One. It's like, even if it's sort of stalled at this point, I feel it really reignited the conversation around space exploration and space colonization. Because after Mars One happened, you have SpaceX talking about it, you have NASA talking about it, and it all of a sudden all these people are so much more interested in, like, hey, maybe we could actually do this. And I felt that Mars One, the other thing about Mars One was there's sort of this tacit assumption when it comes to space exploration that it's the province of government, it's the province of NASA, it's the province of the ESA, it's these sort of big entrenched organizations. And Mars One was sort of let's try something different. Let's look at this a different way. Let's recruit a different set of people for what's really a slightly different set of goals. Let's try to fund it in a different way. Let's try something new and different. And succeed or not, it sort of again reignited the conversation. And I thought the attitude they were going into it was a very interesting one, especially with the colonization aspect and who they were trying to select aspect. The idea being, most of the people who have been astronauts at this point are long-term scientists, or in a lot of cases, military, like fighter pilots, things like that. That's to a large extent a outgrowth of the fact that most exploration has been done through NASA, through the government. But the idea, one of the ideas behind Mars One was the people we are looking for are not astronauts.
Yeah.
The astronaut part of it is a fairly short part of the whole endeavor, and to be honest, a fairly automated part of the whole endeavor. We've sent things to Mars any number of times, mostly without human intervention. We're pretty good at it at this point. And so the people you really need are settlers, are people who have sort of the right attitude of, we're going to go do this because it's important, and once again, we're not coming back. This isn't just about the skills, it's about the mindset. And so that's what they set out to look for, which is, again, different. And I thought that was a very interesting way of going about it.
That's interesting. What about requirements? Is there anything that you need to do or like to advance?
So the selection rounds were mainly, so far, have been primarily interviews, either via written form or like over Skype, that sort of thing, and that's been sort of just narrowing down the candidate pool. The primary requirements were mainly just a level of health. We had to get a doctor's sign off, optometrist sign off, that sort of thing, just to confirm that we were healthy enough to do this. But otherwise, the idea is sort of the next couple rounds are you actually go and sort of get run through trials, eventually start training. Now, that's at the point where we're sort of paused for lack of funding, which is where Mars One is at this point. So who knows when that will happen. But it's less, particular like individual requirements and more just, start with a larger pool and weed it down.
How many years to Mars?
Well, until it were to
no, assuming you leave tomorrow. With current technology.
Not years. 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months, depending on how the cycles line up.
So why are you not coming back?
Because the hard part is getting off Mars, or getting it up there to get off Mars. With anything in space exploration, the issue is mass to a large extent. You have to get it off Earth, you have to get it to Mars, that takes rocket fuel, that takes and so your options are sort of send a return rocket with you, which getting that again out of the atmosphere to Mars, landing it, having it re-get off Mars is just a huge task, and that's the sort of main sticking point for getting to and back from Mars. There's also the issue of a return trip has a much higher radiation risk. That's literally twice the radiation risk of a one-way trip, which is a concern.
Is that because you're going towards the sun?
No, it's just because once you're out of Earth's magnetosphere, you don't have the protection from radiation. Both Earth's magnetosphere and Earth's atmosphere have a very significant degree of protection from the sun's radiation, which you don't have in interstellar space. Mars, similarly, has somewhat of an atmosphere. That it's a much thinner atmosphere, but the fact that it has some atmosphere still protects you a little bit from radiation, though it doesn't have a magnetosphere, so it's not nearly as big protection. But once you are, the idea is once you are on Mars, the settlement itself would be mostly buried, and then you use the Martian soil as a radiation protection, or at least when you're inside, and you limit your exterior time. But again, when it comes to weight, you can do that once you get there because you can use Martian soil. Having that mass to get there is a non-starter, just because again, getting it into space, getting it into the correct transport orbit and whatnot, just would take way too much fuel.
Yeah, that's a lot to know. Okay, do you guys want to ask any questions? No. We actually have two teams here with two different projects. One team, the space particles, they actually research the radiation issue. And the Galaxy Rulers team, they do research on Mars 100 astronauts, and their project is to grow plants on Mars, and they want to customize those plants for those astronauts who are gonna be there, basically for you.
Right.
So yeah, guys, you want to ask any questions? Yeah, I want sure.
What do you feel about leaving Earth as like a Mars One?
To be honest, that is important enough. I have a very strong social network here. I have family, I have friends, I have a lot of people in a good life that I'd be leaving behind, and that's a hard prospect. And that's sort of the it's funny because it's if someone offered me a job in Boston, say I had to leave all this behind, I probably wouldn't take it, right? Because I have yet to find a career, as it were, that I think is important enough and potentially fulfilling enough to pull me away from everything I have. In the case of actually starting space colonization, it's a sort of that is important enough. I think that would be fulfilling enough that it counterbalances the leaving everything behind.
And what do you think about like customizing plants on Mars or each astronaut? Like, it hasn't been like really popular.
What do you mean by customizing plants per astronaut?
Like, as in if you have a plant that you bring in to the Mars One base by your own, not provided by like Mars One. Like your choice of plant.
I mean, there's sort of the with anything with a mission like this, I feel that you're probably going to be more restricted early on and sort of get less restricted, as you go, because sort of in the very first launch, it's going to be a relatively small living space, relatively few people. You sort of really don't want anything to go wrong. You don't have that much redundancy. So sort of starting out, you probably want more like tailored to nutrition content and that sort of thing. Then as the base expands, as you increase the amount of living space, one of the ideas is eventually being able to build new living space out of Martian soil. So basically baking bricks out of Mars soil, actually being able to construct a much larger airtight area. at that point, I think you could start thinking more about personal preferences, what people would find interesting, what people would like to try out, that sort of thing, mainly because you sort of have a more entrenched built-in infrastructure that's just more stable and a little bit less risk of introducing new factors.
Like more flexibility.
Right.
Why did you choose to be part of Mars 100?
Again, it's sort of, I think this is important enough, right? I think that I at least like to believe that, I would be capable and like a benefit to a mission like that. And it's sort of the, I would like to, also like to believe that they're, doing this large, narrowing the group to try to, select the best people for something like this. And I feel if you feel you can contribute, and it's something you feel is important, then you should at least try to contribute, right? Because that's like, a mission like this, especially something that's volunteer like this, needs people to volunteer to have even the remotest chance of succeeding.
What training did you have to receive to go on this mission?
None so far, but that's so the progress would be they narrow it down, eventually get to a group of 24. So they're at 100 now. Eventually get to a group of 24 in 6 teams of 4, because each sort of trip of sending people would be a group of 4, and then one orbital cycle later another group of 4, and then those 24 that they eventually select would go through 8 to 10 years of training between selection and the actual mission. And it would be training in any number of things. It would be training in medicine, training in the equipment that's being brought with, training in geology, training in potentially exobiology, all these sorts of things that you'd need there. And it would also vary between the groups of 4. The idea is that for any given necessary skill, medicine, equipment, things like that, you have 2 people that have been trained to be experts in that particular thing. So you have again, some level of redundancy in case there was injury, in case there was sickness, in case, so on and so forth.
And what's so intriguing about Mars to you as?
It's not Mars itself. It's much more about starting to expand outward into the universe, as it were. Mars, in particular, it just happens to be a good stepping stone, or a good first step, as it were. In the sense of it's reasonably close. It's hostile in the environment is hostile in very manageable ways, as opposed to something like Venus, which would melt, literally is hot enough to melt lead. The gravity is not too small; it's about 1/3 Earth, so it's something we believe we could potentially adapt to. The day-night cycle is actually just over 24 hours, so it's not going to completely screw up your circadian rhythms. It has sunlight that you can use for power. There's just a lot of advantages of Mars is, compared to most of the rest of the things in our solar system, relatively easy to actually get, potentially build a settlement on.
Like a sister planet.
Yeah.
And what is another planet what is like for a liver on Earth to go to another planet to live and settle in?
What do you mean?
To be, what is the thought process that you go through as what is it like to live on Mars?
I mean, I feel like until Lars said you won't know until you get there, right? And that's part of the idea behind it. Is a lot of these things we have no idea, or we can sort of guess and extrapolate and figure out, imagine what it would be like, but part of the reason to actually sort of take the step forward is to experience it, is to learn how do people work in these cases, how is the quality of life, that sort of thing. To a large extent, though, you know, I'm a self-proclaimed geek. I spend much of my time, you know, inside anyways. So, yeah, what's much of my time inside on Earth versus much of my time inside on Mars, right?
Yeah. And that's it for me. Thank you.
So you're going with strangers, like not people you know. Like, how do you feel about that?
Strangers eventually, or strangers to start with, but one of the ideas behind the training is, you know, they group you into the groups of 4 at the start of the training, and you would train with that group of 4 for, you know, 8 to 10 years before going. It really wouldn't be strangers by the end. And one of the ideas of that training specifically is that you want people who you've sort of proven work really well together, who have you know, you've learned to work well together. So during that training, if any of one of those teams of 4 were to drop out or to, you know, be deemed like not acceptable for some reason or another, the entire group of 4 starts over to ensure, like, so you're not, you know, introducing a new fact, not introducing a stranger, as it were, nearer to the end of the process. That, you know, the groups of 4 that go will be the groups of 4 that have been working together and very much not strangers anymore.
What if someone like what if this like continuously happens and like the one group does like don't get along with each other?
Well, hopefully to a large extent, at least with the, you know, groups of 4, you figure that out long before you actually send anyone. But, you know, as the settlement gets bigger, you know, you have, you know, one of the later groups, one of the former groups don't get along very well. You'll have a bigger space. You know, you don't necessarily have to interact with each other constantly. It's, you know, sort of the same question you could ask of, you know, at a school, right? Like, you know, what if one group of the school and the other group of the school don't get along that well? Well, you know, as long as they sort of, it doesn't interfere with their work, they just kind of keep apart from each other and go on their merry ways. And you can, you know, that becomes less of an issue as the colony gets bigger, because you have the more space. You know, don't have to be interacting with everyone on a constant basis. So
but like if you once you get to Mars, how are you gonna like start like making a colony? Like, are you like where are you gonna live and like where? So
the to start with, the living space would be sent from Earth. The first team's living space would be sent the cycle before, so about 2 years before they get there, and would be set up mostly automated via either itself being automated via rovers, and the living space is the large part of it's actually inflatable. So you send a much smaller capsule, or 6 smaller capsules, and then 2 of them have a much larger inflatable living space. So that's what you start with, and then when the first team arrives, the second team's, you know, quarters are sent. First team sets the second team's quarters. Second team arrives, third team's quarters are sent, so on and so forth.
So how long do you think they will stay there?
Indefinitely.
So never come back?
I mean, the idea is that, you know, maybe eventually there'll be some possibility of coming back, but don't assume.
Okay. So when do you think the first group of human being will be sent?
You know, at this point, it's as I mentioned before, it's sort of stalled via funding. So whenever they get funding, probably about 10 years from then.
But if you have enough money now,
the idea would be about 10 years, it'd be about a decade for training.
okay.
And
Is there any kind of an age group you want to send the first, or?
no, sort of as assuming basically they left again, since they're searching more for necessarily settlers,
Yeah.
like an astronaut.
Yeah.
The idea is if you are healthy, if you can complete the training, then you're good to go.
And then it's a kind of say goodbye to the Earth.
Right. Yep.
What's there for qualification to be selected?
Again, at this point, mainly be healthy, have the right attitude. Yeah.
Any kind of anyone.
Pretty much. You know, you sort of the first interview, the first over Skype interview was they had given us basically a study packet of material to learn before the interview. So that's part of the demonstration. Because a big part of the idea is you're going to be training for 8 years or so before you go. So it's not that you need to know particular things. It's you need to be able to show the capacity of be able to learn. Basically, like they will teach you what you need to know. You just have to show that you have the right mindset. You are willing and able to learn. You're willing and able to put the energy in. That sort of thing.
Is it government-based or kind of a
Very much not. That's a nonprofit.
nonprofit? Okay, so
Dutch nonprofit.
you are one of them aiming the Earth someday.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
One of the 100 people that they narrowed down to. So far.
Wow.
So what about like, what if you got sick? Then, what kind of medication or what kind of, do you have a doctor?
I mean, so two, in at least in a first group of 4, 2 of them will be trained in medicine, both first aid and some level of just like maintenance medicine. That's part of the risk, right? If you get sick and there's not a way to deal with it,
You're done.
take care of it the best you can, and we'll send 4 more people in 2 years.
So where's the main training base in U.S.?
It's not set, not determined yet.
Oh, so you basically you work from.
Well, I mean, at this point, there's nothing moving forward with it. Right. So I'm working for Microsoft and carrying on with my life as usual.
Okay.
So until it picks back up, until if and when it picks back up again.
Oh, okay.
How do you keep up with a sustainable amount of food?
So the big answer is you recycle everything. But the food would be grown either hydroponically, aeroponically, one of the indoor growing mechanisms. To a large extent, plants grow themselves, as it were. The input you need for them is light. Light's reasonably easy to generate, given enough electricity. You need water, which can be extracted from the Martian soil. You need carbon dioxide, which is what most of Mars' atmosphere is made of, and some level of nutrients, which you could either bring with and use you sort of use various forms of plants to like nitrogen fixing plants, for example, to recycle the soil a little bit. Some of it is you use Mars soil to get some of the like mineral nutrients, and as much as possible, you let nothing leave the system. So plant waste, human waste, all these sorts of things you capture in the cycle, sort of have as little leave the system as possible.
So you'll be there and you'll be surviving on plant food, I'm guessing? And
Primarily, yes.
So no meat, right?
Not to start with.
Not unless you got livestock.
Right. I mean, it might be possible to eventually bring fish, would be my guess for the first meat. But yeah, maybe chickens or something like that. Larger livestock would be a long time.
So how much does it cost to set? Do you know NASA send the rover over?
Not off the top of my head, a lot. I remember, I believe the Mars one figure that they were looking at for funding for the actual launch and equipment, things like that, I think was in the realm of $8 billion.
So do you think it's more realistic for a government get there first, or is it private funding?
At this point, there's sort of 3 different mechanisms that are in flight in various forms. NASA started talking about it, that would be the government funding. SpaceX has started talking about it, that would be the private funding. Mars One has started talking about it, that would be basically crowdsourced. Investor by means of televising it and getting a much larger group of people sort of involved in the process.
So if you look at like historically, you know, how exploration has been historically, right? Let's say Columbus, you know, from Spain or Portugal, wherever he's from, you know, trying to find a new land. It's always there's some sort of motivation that's driving it, right?
Right.
And in the old days, it was like, you know, whoever gets there first, you get everything that's on the planet. You know, is there some sort of motivation like that, or is it, I mean, like, is there rules and?
That's actually one of the things that I thought was, you know, it's one of those, who knows, you know, if it's going to work. But one of the interesting things that Mars One was trying is the motivation is sort of exploration, but the interest in exploration sort of, you know, again, crowdsourced amongst people. Like, you know, why the sort of idea behind it is, you know, you have people who will watch shows like Ice Truckers, or Deadliest Catch, or, you know, various, you know, documentaries or things like that. And, you know, why do people watch these shows? Well, they watch these shows because there's sort of this interest in, you know, exploration, learning new things. So if you can, you know, use that interest and sort of have that interest fuel the idea of Mars One is, you know, they're going to televise the whole thing, they're going to record the whole thing, they're going to, you know, sort of get a much larger group of people involved. And, you know, sort of the outset has to be funded by investors, but the eventual payback is sort of this, you know, funneling in of interest from the entire planet, ideally.
But how long does it take for radio waves from Mars? Like how long does if you were to like call someone to Earth? Like,
Depends on the orbit. I believe it's between at the low end, it's about 3 minutes. At the high end, I think it's around 22 minutes. And so, you know, double that for a round trip. So calling someone wouldn't necessarily be possible, but, you know, you could do voicemail, you could do, you know, texting, things like that. It just, you have to wait for the round trip.
You guys have any questions about radiation?
Radiation-wise, so like, what radiation, like, I know there's many types of radiation, beta, alpha, whatever, what radiation are you primarily trying to block? Like, what is Mars being hit with?
Gamma.
Gamma.
Very, you know, solar radiation primarily, which is, I believe, going to be less particles and more waves. It's something like an alpha particle is basically a helium nucleus. And that's gonna, you know, that's not the sort of thing that the sun is gonna be sending out. You're gonna be hit with. It's mainly just energy.
So like, how can you block that? Like, how deep would a base have to be in Martian soil?
I believe it was a few meters.
So like, how would you get it? Like a ladder up and down ladder?
So you'd have.
You can actually, yeah, you can totally just, yeah.
So the rough side view of what the base would look like is you have the landers themselves are what the sort of start of the base is, and then you have out of the back of the lander the large inflatable section, which would be the primary living area, and then for the landers, so there's three types of landers. There's the living module landers, there's life support landers, and there's storage landers. Life support and storage are mainly just automated things, so they don't, you know, they'd be to either side of this. The living module landers, you have the equipment in here would be the wet areas, so shower, kitchen, things like that. The airlock, which would be out the front of this. And then your primary living area, your food growing area, that would be in this inflatable section, right? So this inflatable section is what you would primarily bury in Martian soil. Since that's where you're going to be spending most of your time, that's where you want the most radiation protection. And then you'd use this section for ingress and egress.
So like you dig it into the side of the hill, or like how would you?
You'd bury it afterwards.
Oh, so you're like picking stubble, or?
Pretty much. But it's the idea of the rovers they would be sending with are much less, you know, the rovers we send to Mars at this point are much more scientific instruments. The rovers that they would be sending with for this are much more like construction equipment, right? So you'd have claws, shuttles, things like that on the rover. So that's primarily what you'd be using, actually even before the astronauts get there, to bury the habitats.
So, and another last question, travel, right? You'd like to explore Mars, like, I'm guessing, like traveling beyond, let's just say, your landing site?
Eventually, but that's much more of a eventually sort of thing. Again, you want to minimize your time outside, so you wouldn't want to do extensive travel without some form of radiation protection en route, either a rover or some sort of portable shelter or things like that. And that's not the initial focus. The initial focus is getting there, establishing a base, surviving, and sort of once you've done that, once you have that foothold, then you can start thinking about expanding, potentially being able to build more, so like for example, take a rover, right? Something that you could, a portable means of protecting yourself from radiation. Sending one as a whole is it's a large, heavy proposition. It's something that's going to be extremely hard to send for. Once you have people there, once you have people fairly well established there, you could start sending parts for it, over the course of a number of trips, and then having people there assemble it. So, maybe a decade after the first settlers have landed, maybe at that point you have sufficient pieces to construct something and start exploring outwards.
Anything else? No. Anyone else, people? Okay, for galaxy rulers, I feel like you didn't really ask the question that you wanted to ask Carl about the plan.
Wait,
The plan? Do you remember when he asked about the plans that he would choose if he had a chance?
Oh, yeah. So for the custom, if you were going to Mars and there was a choice for you to choose the planet, which one would you pick?
It's an interesting question. I mean, sort of easy answer is potatoes, but I think those have a large, a good chance of being one of the first plants you get sent with anyways, because they have such high nutrition content. Delicious and good, right? So I feel that answer is kind of cheating. Probably some sort of fruit tree. I don't know one off the top of my head. And that's one of the ideas of once you can sort of build your own shelter, having a larger shelter, is having it big enough that you could grow trees. So my guess would be, I don't know what kind of fruit tree. I don't know, I have to think about it.
Jackfruit. Because the jackfruit, there's a lot of nutrition, and then the seed inside, it can be like protein, like potatoes. You can eat that. So,
They're planning for the customized flower or plant to be more of healing for homesickness, where you would swap into that.
No, not the oxygen, but just more of a mental thing, because you're on Mars and it looks like a desert.
Still probably a tree of some sort. Not necessarily a fruit tree or something like that, but I grew up in Cincinnati. Then after that, after college, I moved out here. So I've been surrounded by woodlands most of my life. So probably some, especially something, if you get it big enough that you could sit under or something like that, a tree of some sort.
Yeah. So for when I asked the question, I was asking in the point of view where it's a mental aspect. Would you think that would be a good thing to do for every astronaut, as if you had a choice?
Again, eventually. I feel, to start with, it's probably going to, mementos, as it were, are probably going to be things that are a little bit less resource intensive. But having, imagine if you could build a space inside that has trees, that has grass, that, has at least some level of simulacrum of being outside. Probably not something to start with, definitely something to aim towards.
Yeah, so guys are doing research on different plants, and we also reached out to another Mars 100 astronaut, Kelly Gerardi, And she said that she would like a small tiny cactus with her. So that's what we were thinking about, just bringing something that is good to look at and probably, makes you feel more like home. Yeah. Anything else, guys? Any other questions? No? You good? Okay. I guess we're good. Okay, thank you so much for coming here.
Thanks for asking me to come talk.
Sure. Well, I think we're in luck because you're here, and one of the teams is doing this research on the Mars One, and it's just amazing that you just happen to be here.
Only one in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I know. Because we did a research.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you a lot.